Okay, thank you very much. I know we're all excited for this fireside chat with Mark McKenna, who is, as we know, the chairman and CEO of Mirador and the former chairman and CEO of Prometheus Biosciences. And of course, I'm joined with Charlie Yang, my co-moderator, who is a biotech and pharma analyst at Bank of America.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for attending this session, and thanks Mark for being here. So I want to go all the way back to the beginning, right? So last year you sold Prometheus to Merck for almost $11 billion. I think that was probably one of the largest phase 2 assets been ever taken out by a company. Maybe just walk us through some of like the process of how you came about, with Prometheus all the way from the beginning of early cycle all the way to the transactions.
Yeah, thanks so much to Mass General for having me and for Bank of America. A couple thoughts. The $10.8 billion, clearly, a big, impact on investors, on my employees, but the most important impact was on patients. And the fact of the matter is that Prometheus went out there with the aspiration to bring precision medicine into immunology, an area where you look across most of these disease areas, it's chronic disease where these patients are dealing with waxing and waning disease, in and out of the hospital in some cases, and in most cases that we are working in, know how many bathrooms are along the drive home from work every day. And we were able, during that 4-year journey, to move the watermark of efficacy from a 10% remission rate to a 25% remission rate. And I want to finish off where the last panel left off, which is we can do better. And that's exactly what Mirador is about, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But maybe just as a backdrop to Prometheus and the journey, because I'm guessing there's a few physician scientists, entrepreneurs in the room. Was that a fair assumption? And the idea of being able to take a company from early preclinical all the way into phase 3 and having a transaction is many of our dreams. But I think that what went into that and the highs and lows of that journey, I think, are worth noting. A few things that I would call out. So I left Big Pharma in 2019 to go work in biotech. And so I went to a company that was pre-DC, and it was a $50 million valuation company with 24 people. And at the time, there were a number of strategic and financial challenges that were ahead of us. One, we were a therapeutics company, but we had a revenue stage diagnostic business that was supposed to enable precision medicine. And the challenge there of raising capital with a mixed business model structure proved very challenging. And in order to raise capital, we spun that diagnostic business off to shareholders. And so that required convincing a board that had recently acquired this diagnostic business to say, yeah, we agree with you that these two are probably better off as a standalone entities. The other challenge we had was unproven biology. TL1A, probably one of the most popular targets now in immunology, came out of Cedars-Sinai through an academic partnership with Cedars and the work of Dr. Steph Targan. And over the past 25 years, Dr. Targan built a biorepository of data from IBD patients, all kinds of material, blood, tissue, and was really on the forefront of biobanking, particularly in immunology. And through those efforts, discovered this pathway, TL1A, which was a driver of both inflammation and fibrosis in the body, particularly in the GI tract. And so through this discovery at Cedars-Sinai, a company was created. And that company went out to, from a small $50 million company, raise capital after sorting out the strategic challenges and making it look like a soon-to-be public company, building the right team around it, and then working to, for the very first time, bring precision medicine to immunology. And precision medicine means a lot of things to different people. At the time, what it meant to us was being able to identify the right patient for the right drug. And knowing that we weren't going to have oncology-like impact, at least on the first go-around, because of the fact we're not looking at monogenetic type of diseases. We ran the first prospective trial in I&I where we predefined a genetic signature which was going to identify which patients are more likely to respond to drug than not. And went out and raised capital around that thesis and went public and really built a lot of interest from pharma on this endeavor. As everyone in here knows, immunology is the second largest drug spend category in the US. And the only way to break down these large chronic diseases, is start to think about subsets of populations. And that's how we thought about it. So we basically went from a small company, which took me a year to raise the first round of capital. I flew on my own United Airlines points to Europe to do a partnership because at the time I didn't know we were going to be able to raise capital. And so for the entrepreneurs that are out there saying, they're maybe in a valley at the moment, I want you to know that there is a lot of opportunity, and the biggest part of it is grit and staying true to the science. And we did that, and we went from no one taking my call to having 4 of the pharma CEOs in my office on the same week. And so to me, it was the greatest journey, and which would lead us to Mirador, which is the new company where we hope to go bigger, better, faster, on newer targets, focused on where immunology is going to be, not today, but where it's going to be the next 5-10 years from now.
So speaking of that, Mark, I mean, doing this again, starting over again now with Mirador, where do you view it going? What is your vision right now for the company? What are you focused on in terms of targets and pathways?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sure there's a couple investors that participated in our Series A that would like to know as well. So we are still in stealth mode. What I would say that we're doing here is we have a platform, an engine called Mirador 360, which we're very focused on scaling. It's our data engine, where we've collected material from in collaborations with major academic centers across the US, as well as tapping into open data sets that are available in the key cluster areas that we want to focus on. We've said publicly that those are GI, those are lung, fibrotic lung, and then rare skin. And these are the areas that we want to absolutely have the highest quality of data, which is going to allow us to leverage our toolbox of AI, ML tools to be able to really crack this code on precision medicine. And really the aim here is to go precision medicine from start to finish. And what that means to us is that we're leveraging this data and the interpretation of that data in order to determine which targets we want to go after. When you think about like combination therapy, which is a big part of where I&I is going, where is the MOA synergy? Where can 1 + 1 = 3? And then we're also leveraging this data set to be able to improve POS. And the probability of success in these clinical trials. So that's the aim. We're an asset-focused company and plan on coming out of stealth in the coming quarters as we have a number of different assets that are ready for the clinic.
I do want to follow on that. I mean, you raised $400 million for Mirador. I mean, that's a lot of money. But just given kind of what you described, I'm just kind of curious on what are the key components kind of your pitch that convince the investors to really pour that significant amount of money into something that is perhaps a little more amorphous or a little bit still stealth, right?
Yeah.
For now.
So look, the investment was based upon the team and the dream, and I think part of that is there was a lot of unfinished business with 1.0. With Mirador, we feel like we can do things bigger, better, faster, working on new targets where the puck's going to be the next 5 to 10 years. And look, to the immunologist in the room, I'm sitting next to one, I personally and my team believes that the way to disrupt here and bring better outcomes to patients, let's pause there for a second. Humira, great drug, TNF, broke a lot of ceiling, a lot of the efficacy ceiling 20 years ago. We can do better. In inflammatory bowel disease, the average remission rate with a TNF therapy is 12% in clinical trials, 12%. We can do better. How do you do that? Well, I think it's novel targets. It comes down to precision medicine, the right drug for the right patient, combination therapy that we talked about a moment ago, and then also modality. So I think those are the four ways, and it was the team, it was the strategy, it was the vision of building a disease area focused company, not too dissimilar to what Vertex has done, and focus in those key clusters and leverage our engine to be able to increase probability of success, take a clinically validated idea in other areas and start to bring it into the key areas of clusters that we want to work in.
Great.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about, looking at novel pathways that are involved in different diseases. Where do you see the new spaces for immunology R&D right now? Do you see it in these novel pathways? Do you see it in novel intersections of immunology and other diseases? How are these macro trends changing in the field?
Yeah, I think that all four of the things that I just mentioned is really the outline or the playbook for where we're going to see innovation for patients over the next 5 to 10 years. You think about the novel targets is one of the harder ones to crack. It's a longer lead time. It's harder to get investors to rally behind those. When you think about the capital markets today, investors are really wanting to fund validated ideas, which isn't, that's great as long as you're moving the paradigm forward. If you're just producing something that is as good, there's going to be some inherent challenges as you go into reimbursement. And so for us, it was about moving, transforming things. And I think the easiest way that pharma is doing it today is through combination therapies. Within immunology, J&J kind of led the groundwork here with respect to taking a look at testing 2 different MOAs that are both validated and approved and putting them together and showing a pretty step function change with regards to outcomes. So I think that combination therapy, I think, is going to be probably the low-hanging fruit in terms of how we move the ball for patients. But you think about other areas where modality, we're going to talk about B cells in a moment, but clearly you see this, migration of MOAs coming over from oncology into immunology, CAR-Ts, engagers, and clearly, there's almost more drugs in B cells today than there are lupus patients. So hopefully we can crack the code with regard to lupus based upon the number of therapies that are out there. But novel biology, it's just a long road, and we had the benefit before of working with Cedars-Sinai and Dr. Steph Targan to be able to validate this pathway and show that how relevant it is. I think there's a number of other targets that we're going to work on that are going to, have TL1A-like potential. But let's not forget combinations and precision medicine are going to play an important role here.
So, the market, as you said before, right, it's been really tough. And right, you mentioned J&J, but obviously there are all these other immunology players coming to market after the Prometheus transaction. I'm just wondering, just given the competitive landscape, right, in the next coming few years, how do you think the market will evolve, and as Mirator move into the clinical stage, what do you think you're trying to differentiate versus the other players out there?
I would say that 2024, the juxtaposition to that was 2020, where today investors are very selective about which ideas they're funding, whereas in 2020 you saw almost every idea getting pushed out into the public markets and being funded. And I think that there are some big macro factors that have been talked about here at the conference that are definitely at play. The correlation in biotech versus the interest rates, it's highly correlated. And so we've seen a number of companies that went out in the capital markets in 2020 that probably shouldn't have gone out, but investors, wanted to have liquidity, so they pushed those companies out. And then you had the change in interest rates, which you saw a drawdown of generalist activity within the biotech sector. Quite honestly, I am very bullish about what 2025 looks like, given that inherent correlation that we see with interest rates, but also because of the innovation that's going on in the space. Well beyond just what's going on in immunology. I'm involved with New Amsterdam Pharma, which is in the cardiovascular space. But also you think about it, what's going on in oncology today and the moonshot to break, solve the inherent challenges that exist within cancer care for patients. I would just say that 25 years ago, there was a handful of companies that were working on drugs for cancer. Today, there's over 850 public companies that are working to find cures in cancer. And so building on what was said in 2 panels ago, I do believe that this is the healthcare revolution. It will be driven by data, and it will be driven by, the democratization of the data. What should remain proprietary is the analysis of that data. I think for us to move the ball forward for patients and for humankind, the data does need to be available for everyone.
Now, you mentioned a lot of the therapeutics and the immunotherapeutics in the realm of cancer and oncology, and a lot of them traditionally have focused on T-cell mediated therapeutics. So, a lot of the immune checkpoint, what we think about there is all T-cell centric, but we're missing an entirely different cell type, right? The B cell. And I think there's growing evidence that B cells are playing a very important role both in a lot of immune diseases and a lot of diseases like cancer. So where do you see the development of B cell therapies coming into play?
I think we're still very early days, building on the previous conversation around the number of drugs that are currently under evaluation for lupus. Early days, it was all, it was the CD20s of the world, where you're trying to get, thread that needle between potent, efficacy and safety. And what I think we learned through those experiments is largely they were safe, but they weren't very effective. And as a number of these therapies have been challenged in oncology, and the school of funding has moved to immunology, you've seen a lot more of these therapies being, moved to immunology. So I think personally, when you think about like T-cell engagers, like a CD19, CD3, those type of formats, bispecifics, have incredible potential to help patients in these B-cell driven diseases. I think that they're probably a better alternative to CAR T therapy, which in my opinion, the experiment's still underway. Let's wait and see. But when you look at patient enrollment in those areas, as an investor myself, I think that you have a hard time getting to a TAM that is, super attractive. Whereas, if these T-cell engagers can get into the more, moderate patients within lupus, myositis, and other areas, it could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
The jury's probably still out there.
Yeah.
So I guess, Amgen's Ablisa, they're going to have data in myasthenia gravis pretty soon. Obviously, that's a monoclonal antibody. I'm just wondering, do you have any view on the outcome of that particular trial would impact, the whole industry in terms of investment in the biologics versus the cell therapies?
Absolutely. I think for Mirador, we're very clear what we want to work on and how we're going to move the needle for patients. I think one of the challenges that a lot of early stage companies is they try and be all things to all people. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to be very focused on, we're agnostic to modality. We're not going to get into CAR Ts. That's a whole different ballgame there from a manufacturing perspective. But when you think about small molecule peptides, you think about antibodies, we want to focus on leveraging our expertise, subject matter experts within inflammatory bowel disease, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and some of the rare skin diseases. That's where we want to focus on. And for us, I'd rather not take a technical risk and take a biology risk. I'm willing to take, we're trying to thread that needle and try and find some biological evidences along with the genetic evidences to help us make the right decision. I think one of our clear takeaways from the TL1A experience at Prometheus was if you have strong genetic evidence supporting the link to the target, your odds of success are going to go up dramatically. And we've seen that play out time and time again in other disease areas. Why aren't we doing it in immunology?
Yeah, and piggybacking on that for a second, I mean, when we think about precision medicine, one concern I think is always, well, when we take this to the clinic, how do we actually translate this into the clinic? Are we traveling in a direction where clinical medicine is by definition going to have to be looking at genetic risk factors for a lot of different diseases that we haven't, that we aren't used to looking at genetic factors for?
I believe that the payers are going to demand this approach. As you think about the explosion of therapies like the GLP-1s, you're going to see a huge budget squeeze at the payers. And we've talked about real-world evidence and value-based contracts for so many different years, but it has largely been lip service. You could probably name on, your fingers and toes how many successful value-based contracts have been completed. And so I think in terms of clinical design, I think that the FDA is absolutely open to working with sponsors to develop innovative clinical strategies that go after subsets. I think, if we're being honest here, Big Pharma has been somewhat reluctant to go down that path. Why shrink markets when you can go after the entire pie? Mirador's approach is going to be focused on stratifying patients, but also creating products that can be potentially relevant with all comers as well. And so I think you can almost have your cake and eat it too. It's a hybrid approach that allows us to transition from where we are today, which is all-comer drugs, to where we need to be, which is precision-guided therapies that are the right for patients. And I think that pharma is going to be always a little bit reluctant to get there. We need to lead in academic medicine and as well as in biotech to forge that path.
And if I may, just to follow up on that as well, where do you think the main bottleneck is? Is it in identifying the endotypes, the patients to go after that could respond, or is it in coming up with the more specialized therapeutics?
I think that a big driver here is the fact that the data landscape that we're working with today over the last 12 to 18 months has dramatically changed. What we were doing before, we couldn't imagine what is possible today in terms of the digestion of data, the curation of data, leveraging ChatGPT to answer questions, and being able to, within an organization, not have to rely on just the KOL who works in our group to have all the information about different targets, but actually be able to download those and have our ML AI technology be able to help us synthesize that to make the right decisions. And I can tell you that there's a host of open source data that's very well characterized today that is helping us to make better decisions. It needs to be paired with very smaller, more specific data sets that can help validate insights. And even the sequencing techniques, as we resequence patients, has evolved. And we see like almost a 30% error rate as we resequence patients that were done 10 years ago versus what's done today. It's remarkable. And so I think that being able to get what is your truth, and then being able to write the right algorithms off of that to be able to say, hey, this is a patient that is likely to respond. And if we set our benchmarks with investors or with pharma as perfection, we're never going to get there. To me, this is all about not letting perfect get in the way of good in terms of moving the ball forward for patients. Let's be clear, in inflammatory bowel disease today, it's 25% clinical remission rates. These are some of the largest drugs in the world, Humira, Skyrizi, to name a few. We can do better. That means that 75% of patients still have unmet needs. And I think the only way to break through the ceiling is leverage this data engine to be able to start to make better bets based upon both biology and genetics, and actually think about getting to combination therapy much faster through in silico experiments.
Do you have any view on perhaps the shorter acting oral route of administration versus the long acting injectables, and how that market could change in the immunology space?
I mean, I think there's a number of companies out there that have a really exciting approach to cracking the code within atopic dermatitis and other areas of inflammatory bowel disease that I'm particularly keen on. I think that there is a market for a longer acting, improved dosing scheme drug, but they need to continue to move the bar forward as far as an efficacy perspective as well. And I think that as far as orals go, you've seen a number of different takeouts of companies like Morphic and others that are, validated targets, but they're an oral delivery. The challenge that I have with that is that the payers don't pay for convenience. Let me say that again. Payers don't pay for convenience. They pay for efficacy improvements. And I think that if you can crack both, in terms of longer acting, better efficacy, it could be a really exciting story.
Perfect. Maybe just to wrap up, how you touched on this a little bit like earlier, but just where do you think where we are in terms of the cycles, in terms of the biotech environment, just given the interest rate, cut?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to forecast for 25. Proceed at your own risk, do your own work. But I think that the correlation is about as good as it gets as it relates to investments in biotech and the Fed funds rate. I would just say that there's a unique backdrop here with regards to the back end of this decade in healthcare. You have a tsunami of LOEs forthcoming, loss of exclusivity, where drugs are going to be coming off patents. I think that it's about $320 billion of revenue that big pharma is going to lose out between now and the end of the decade. $320 billion. So, as everyone in here understands, this is a really important ecosystem where you have the biotech companies, the smaller companies, pioneering new science, pushing the boundaries of where big pharma would traditionally go, but pharma using that as part of their own pipelines. And so I think that that's going to be good for biotech stocks on the backdrop of the interest rates as well. What we've seen to date in 2024 is a lot of M&A activity, but a lot of it's been on the private side because a lot of the more mature companies have already been taken out or are not willing to be bought. And so I would say that 2025 is, from an M&A perspective, given the fact that we've moved away from the 2020 consolidation of big companies because of the FTC, I predict 2025 is going to be a remarkable year, not only driven by M&A, which will have a follow through on the capital markets.
Great. With that, we'll end this session. Thanks so much, guys.